Well, it's a subject I've been interested in for a long time. What inspired me was a conversation with my daughter during the summer of 2006, when the war in Lebanon was going on with Israel. And I started trying to explain it. We realized there wasn't a simple explanation of what was going on. It wasn't just about Israel and Lebanon or Hezbollah. It was relevant to Syria. How was it relevant to what was going on with Iran and its nuclear program? Did it fit in at all with events in Iraq? So it seemed to me that there was a need to talk about issues from that part of the world in a connected way. I'd been wanting to write something that dealt with contemporary conflicts, a history, for some time, but I hadn't decided to focus particularly on the Middle East. Because I'm not particularly a Middle Eastern specialist as such, I decided that the way to do it was through the United States, because though a Brit, I'm always been interested in American politics and have written quite a bit about American politics before. So that was why it sort of took the form it did. It's a good question, because I think a lot of Americans wish to look forward. I mean, it's a forward-looking people, and the past, which is full of disappointments and irritations, is something you may wish to consign to historians and let them get on with it. Also, I think September the 11th. I think September the 11th had appeared as sort of a punctuation point. You know, that almost history started anew then. It was a new era. And therefore the continuities with the previous era tended to get forgotten. Discussions with senior Americans, I would often find that they were explaining to me how the country had changed, how attitudes had changed, how Americans were now prepared to do things different to how they were prepared to do things before. And I understand that, but I think it's always a shame to lose the real context of history, because the events that we're dealing with now, to me, can only be properly understood if you go back to at least their relatively recent origins, and sometimes even go into their very historical origins. Well, I think first to say, I don't consider myself to be a Middle Eastern specialist as such. I think it's an important qualification, and therefore the way I've tended to look at it is to try to make sense of the basic conflicts going on. So there are a number of big histories of the Middle East or of the Arab world by Hurami and people like this. But I think it'd be wrong to say that any of those particularly influenced me a lot. My approach when I'm writing something like this is sort of just to sort of seek myself in whatever I can find. I think if you're not going to do archive-based research, which I've done, but archive-based research requires you to get really into the detail of particular policies and work your way through the bureaucracy and the processes and so on. If you're doing something as broad brush as I inevitably have to do in this, I think you really need to get not only a good grip of the secondary material, but the memoirs of the different presidents and so on. And looking back, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it until you posed the question. Actually, a lot of what I was reading were books about the American process rather than the Middle East itself. I did read, obviously, to make sense of what's going on in Lebanon. There's a number of books about Lebanon, but for what I was trying to do was really to try to understand it through American eyes, through the filter. So, say on that particular Tom Friedman's book, I found particularly good because it both had the history of the Lebanon conflict of the 80s, but also the particular impact it was making on him as an American, as a Jew, as a journalist, trying to make sense of the conflict at a time. And I think that was always part of what I've been trying to do in this book.